Well, thank you, because it's a very cold evening, and actually the Globis faculty and people, they were not sure if I will get 5 people coming or 8 people, so I'm so glad that all of you came. So I want to make this presentation, and then the most interesting part is not my presentation, it's going to be the dialogue with Suzanne, and even more interesting, the questions and any follow-ups that you might have. So let me get started. So the reason why I named this presentation How to Make Womenomics Work is because obviously in Japan, Womenomics is an integral and very critical part of the third arrow of Prime Minister Abe. But more important than that is the fact that I truly believe that women are really the future of great progress in Japan. And utilizing all the elements of value that women can bring to Japan will be very significant in the next few years. But again, every time that you talk to people, it seems like it's really hard to make it work. And I love the audience, but I'm also so glad that there are so many men here. Because this is not an issue only for women. This is an issue in which men and women have to work together to solve. So I congratulate all of you men that managed to make it here, and I hope that this becomes relevant for everyone. So the reason what I wanted to talk about Womenomics is because it's not that difficult, really, to make it work. And what I want to share is our experience in my previous company, and again, some of the things that we are doing recently that show that quickly, if you're committed and you put the right resources and the right elements in place, you can make good progress. So let me start. So I will give a very quick background, then issue setting just to frame the issue, and then talk about the program that we did called Building Talent Edge, and then Womenomics and a general discussion. So I know that this is a very international business school, and this is a very international faculty. So this little map around the world actually shows my path from Colombia to the US to Hong Kong to Australia, Australia back to the US, then to Latin America, then to Turkey, then to Germany, and then to Japan. So hopefully some of the countries that you represent, that you have traveled, are here. So I have been very lucky in my corporate career, where over 25 years I worked in 2 very large multinationals, Abbott Laboratories and Baxter, and both of them gave me the opportunity to get a very broad perspective. And I think that is one of the perspectives that influences and informs my belief about Womenomics and my belief about how much women can contribute to the value of Japan. So prior to this, just to introduce very quickly, I was working for Baxter, around 65,000 employees. Last year, really, the results were 18 billion. And in Japan specifically, we had close to 1,000 employees, 39% of them women and 61 men, and had been in Japan more than 40 years. So very quick introduction. And then Cylon Capital, Brian was kind enough to introduce this. Basically what we do is we invest and acquire companies that want to play in the Japanese or Asia Pacific market, not Japanese companies, only European and US companies. And basically we bring, it's not a private equity firm, we actually bring management expertise as well as capital to create that. Our number 1 acquisition at the moment is this company, Greek company, which is an organic company for more than 40 years and makes most of the products based on honey and research on honey. So if any of you want to try, it's very tasty and at the same time very effective. So let me go to the issue setting. So I'm going to share some of the data that I think is more relevant to try to understand the issue of women and women's representation around the world. You can see that, and this is particularly important, not at the low level of employment, participation, in which, for example, Japan now has probably higher participation than the US the women participation is more important at levels that are executive levels, people that manage something. And like many of you, of course, in your jobs, but this is, for example, at the board level by country. So the Asian average is just really pathetic, right? And then the other countries are not that great. Norway is the only one that has had a very affirmative set of policies. But in general, around the world, the representation of women on boards is pretty low. And in Asia, terrible. When you look at executive committees, these are management teams, the leadership teams in the countries, again, very low representation. Not as bad maybe as Germany, but still pretty poor. When you look at the kind of barriers that women around the world say they face to be able to participate in a more greater way, higher level, in companies, government, non-profit, profit, it doesn't matter. They generally talk about many of the similar ones. The only one that is really very much Asian-oriented is the lack of pro-family public policies, childcare. Everybody knows about the challenges of women in Tokyo to find convenient, flexible childcare. But many of the others are some that we know very well. The double burden, you have to balance home and work. The fact that our mobile phones and iPads and everything else creates an anytime, anywhere performance model, and people expect people to answer emails or participate in conference calls at midnight and Saturdays, Sundays, etc. This one is actually very particular to Asia in the fact that women don't want to promote themselves. They want to be modest. And I'm a man, so I can tell you something. When you ask a man, could you run the space station? Every man says, yeah, sure, no problem. In 1 week, I'll figure it out. Women are much more reluctant to put themselves in the position of risk. And so this is something we need to overcome. And in many cases, maybe because of many of these barriers, women might be less ambitious. But that doesn't mean that in Europe, for example, there are not many of the same challenges. The anytime, anywhere, the double burden, the tendency of women not to promote themselves. This just shows that the barriers, even though they are not completely universal, are similar. And therefore, they can be not only addressed, but they also need to be directly enforced, right? Otherwise, we will not be able to get anybody to change the previous numbers that I showed. So this is the female participation in the workforce. So this is the percent of participation. This is the age group. And you can see the US is this the very deep blue line. And then you can see Japan, you can see Korea in yellow, and the US is this deep blue line. You can see that in Japan is the one with Korea, which actually is a really tough place for women, are the two countries where in the middle of the most productive working period of any professional, which is basically 5 years after you finish university until you are, 45, 50 years old, where the participation in the US is completely flat. Basically, the women don't leave the workforce. In Japan and in Korea, there is a significant dip. So they go very fast, they reach this period and they dip, and then maybe they come back later. And as you know, they come back later in lower jobs, lower paying jobs, part-time jobs, contract jobs. So this is a major issue which is represented actually in the numbers that I will show you in the next slide. This slide actually talks about the pipeline of talent. And the pipeline of talent is how many people enter, university graduates, how many go to the executive committee, how many become CEO, how many go to the board. There are many different numbers across Asia Pacific. Some of them are terrible, and some of them are even more than terrible, okay? But all of them are bad, because you can see that in all these countries, in Japan, in China, in Korea, in Singapore, in Malaysia, basically 50% of the women go to university. They're the university graduate pool. And then, little by little, they just disappear. 49, 45, 11, 1, basically gone. When it's less than 1 means you cannot even measure it, right? There are some countries that are doing a little better. Singapore is 8%. But when you consider that they started at 49, it's not that great, right? So this is a significant challenge for all the economies, because these are women like you, highly trained university graduates, many of them fluent, and they just disappear from the workforce, never to be seen again. Or remaining in very entry-level positions or mid and senior management, which is not what we want. So if you look, Japan, embarrassingly enough, and actually I love Japan, I have lived here in Japan for 13 years, but Japan ranks 105th place out of 135 places in the global gender gap. That's really low. I don't think Japan ranks 105th place in anything else. Normally it's much higher than that. And for example, in politics, only 7.9% of the women MPs in Japan, which is 158th place out of the 189 countries surveyed. So whether you look at the companies, whether you look at the government, the representation is just not representative of the society as a whole. It's not representative of the talent of the country. So that is the issue. The solution is the fact that there are many statistics and many studies, and this is the McKinsey study, which is a very thorough organization, as you know, that shows that across companies, across sectors, industrial sectors, you can prove that organizations that have a more diverse workforce, management team, balance between men and women, you actually perform better financially. It's not only good for society, you perform better financially. This is not just one industry, a bunch of industries. The only industry they couldn't validate this was the telecom media industry. I don't remember why, but I think it was the sample was too small or something like that. But overall, you can show that you get a better return on investment and better profitability. So I hope that at least that gives you a sense that the arguments are really strong. We are losing our talent. We are losing the graduates. They don't reach higher levels. They have a lot of barriers. And all our companies could be much better if we had the right representation. So let me now share our program. And our program was called Building Talent Edge. And we started this program in 2005. And I'm going to show you some numbers that stop in 2008 and 9. And you're going to say, wow, that was a long time ago. What I want to show you more than anything is that it's possible to make change, significant change, and it's possible to make it quickly. So let me just share the initiative. As you know, talent is the most important element associated with success. All companies say they spend an inordinate amount of time developing, coaching, expanding their talent, acquiring talent, and everybody's always talking about the talent war. And if anytime you ask someone, hey, I need an accountant, and I need a lawyer, I need a marketing person, I need an HR person, everybody says, oh no. So difficult to find really good people in that field. And as I show you, I worked in many countries, and I never went to any country in which you said, I need a finance person. And everybody said, oh, here in my country, we have so many great finance people available. No, never. Or marketing, oh yes. Digital marketing, no, we have so many people. Just let me know how many you need and I'll send it to you. No. Everybody's always obsessed about how difficult it is to get talent. And that's one of the reasons why many of you are students here because everybody is interested in improving your capability and potential. So as a result of that, we realized that we needed to bring a new tool to be able to access the entire market. So we wanted to have a more effective, diverse, and sustainable organization, not because it was good for society, even though we believe in that, but because we needed to grow. And in order to grow, you need talent. So we said, okay, we are at 25% women in leadership. These were only women in leadership positions, critical positions, 25%. And we want to achieve 50%. So we were at 25, 50%, and we wanted to do it in all 14 Asia-Pacific countries. Japan, to Vietnam, to India, to Australia, to Korea, to China, to Malaysia, to wherever. So we said, we need to set up a strategy that gets us from 2004 to 2010, from 25 to 50%. That was the goal. I have to say that the reason why we selected 50% was because it seemed like a 50% kind of balanced number. It was not any mathematical thing. We could have chosen 40 or 52, but we chose 50, which anyway was double what we had. And we also wanted to make sure that we communicated this very well because the demographics of the talent pool are changing dramatically. In many countries, such as, for example, China, where up to 20, 30 years ago, there were many restrictions to higher education, men and women started to attend high school and university almost at the same time. So that explains why China has such a high participation of women graduates and in the workforce. And also because we all believed that the skills that women bring to the table are not necessarily different. They allow us to have a balance of opinions and feedback and view of the world. Every company has some set of customers that are outside that company. And understanding those customers through many different eyes, through diversity of backgrounds and gender, I think is critical to be successful. And also because at the end, we will be able to bring, a better balance of corporate responsibility, values, our culture, and we believe that this was going to enrich the organization. So these are the cornerstones of the 3 things we did. We didn't do any more than 3 at the beginning. We had a talent acquisition initiative, a talent development initiative, and a communication initiative. And I'm going to walk them through and share a little bit of what we did. So this is sort of the timeline. 2005 to 2010. I can come back and share this with you, but I will cover many of them throughout the time. The first one was you cannot change the balance of the workforce, particularly the leadership level, unless you can significantly increase the number of women candidates to take higher level positions. It is mathematically not possible. You must have more women to be able to get to 50%. Because if your workforce is only 25% today, there's no way, right? So we started very significant dedicated resources in which we wanted just acquire talent, the best talent. And then we made sure that every time that we search for any job, this is a lot of jobs, right? We were hiring, 70, 80, 90 professional people a year. Every time any of those 70 jobs were slated to be filled, we demanded that we had a 50-50 slate from the recruiter. Now, recruiters, I don't know if anybody's from recruiting here. Recruiters hate that, right? Because this makes the job really hard. But we pay, right? We pay the fees, so at the end, they did it, and then we started to get 50% slate candidates, women candidates, higher percents in some cases, right? And then we also implemented a weekly monitoring system in which every single week all countries reported how many hires we had this week, how many women, where they came from, how many people were in the interview process, how many of them were women. We never hire anyone that did not deserve to be hired. I want to be very clear. So we had slates, and if the man was the best one, we hired the man. If the woman was the best one, we hired the woman. But when you get 50-50 slates, why wouldn't you choose over time 50% hires will be women, right? So by 2008, we already had jumped from 25 to 40%. And then these are the number of women that we hired, 53, 38, and in total 120 and 28. This is, I think, up to 2009, right? This is to show, once again, that this can be done very quickly. The other thing we did is, obviously, when you come into an organization, in order to be successful in the future, you need to be developed. You don't need to be developed. We don't believe that you need to be developed as a woman. We need to develop as a professional. So we offer what we term Leadership Acceleration Program. This is a 2-week program, kind of MBA level, that we offer to the highest potential people. And then overall we had around 127 top talent achieved, and you can see that the participation of men and women just started to go up, 29, 47, 45, 53. And of course, because they were attending the higher level program and they were being developed through this engagement with the rest of the classmates, we had a lot of women promoted, 66, 56, 60, 30%, and a huge amount of women retention, right? Then we also implemented a number of what we call fitness programs, and these fitness programs are really dedicated to making people fitter in their job. So there were technical, commercial fitness programs, there were functional fitness. So we enrolled 1,500 employees, whatever. But many of them were women which were gaining not only the leadership skills, but the functional, technical skills to be considered later when we were promoting. We also did a very extensive job in communication. We wanted to make people understand that this did not mean that we were not going to promote men. This was not anti-men. This was actually trying to get the right level of diversity in the organization. And so everybody that we hired and promoted, once again, were hired or promoted because they were the best. We did not say, oh, we need to hire or promote one more woman. No, we never did that. But what I'm completely confident is if you provide the tools and the right hiring and the right development, in the moment that you make the slate to promote someone, you will find 50% of the time, women or men that can fulfill your requirement. So we did a lot of communications, town halls, websites, etc. We also did a lot of branding this. And interestingly enough, at the beginning, the women, of course, were very interested. But later, many of the men said, I'm proud that the company does that. I'm proud that I belong to a company that can see the balance. Why? Because men have mothers, sisters, cousins, daughters, so they can appreciate that having this opportunity to at least compete fairly is, again, a fair competition was the right to do. And then we did a lot of updates to the employees and track a number of measures into how we were undergoing there. This was not done only for me. This cannot only be done by the leader or anyone like that. It was done because 2-3 levels down the organization, people started to believe. And they were implementing. I interviewed all the people, professional people that joined the company. Like all those 70 that you saw hire, whatever, I interviewed every single one of them. But it's not only the job of the leader. It's really, the job of the leader is to communicate why this makes sense and how to cascade it. And then You really achieve success when someone in Malaysia or in Vietnam is implementing this because he or she believes in this, not because I tell them to do it. Right? At first, you need to push a little bit, but later you can. You have to trust that it has been communicated significantly enough. We also put a lot of accountability, and maybe if you want to put it, we put a little bit of money behind this. We created we have this people and team set of goals. These 3 goals are almost impossible to achieve simultaneously, because one of them talks about retaining all your top talent. This one talks about increasing your top talent. So you have to retain everyone, and at the same time you have to increase it. And then you have to have a diversity goal. So this is 1/6 of anybody's bonus in the leadership, right? So this also was not the only option to give them money. It was to emphasize that this is something that if we do well, we will be more successful, right? This is a driver for business. So we had this accountability for results. You can see, I'm not going to, as I said, I stopped many of the graphs early. You can see how quickly you can make progress. 29, 48. This is director and critical management positions. You can see all levels, and then how the percent participation, start to improve. You can see the percent of women promoted over time. It's not steady all the time. Sometimes you have big jumps, and sometimes you have less. But at the same time, it shows the organization that you're making progress. And I think the most important thing is that you can make it quickly. This is not a 1 century kind of project. Nobody has time for that, right? This is something that you can, over time, show that you make progress. Look at the ratio at 2 different levels, directors and managers, how they jump. Sometimes the managers go down because the directors go up. So the same woman that was here jumped to director, and then the manager percent goes down, right? But at least you can see that there is significant progress. This was China. This is Singapore, where we had huge numbers, right? So it can be done very quickly. So in summary about this, I just want to say that, I think we achieved the 50% by 2009. I think that you see some differences. In some countries was much easier. For example, in Vietnam, we had an all-women general manager, and all head direct reports were women. It just happens that Vietnam has a great population of incredibly well-trained professionals, men and women, and then so the availability of talent, technical, medical, and so forth, and professional is very high. In other places was much harder, right? So again, you can do it quickly if you have the right commitment, the right resources, and the right actions. And personally, I don't think more than these 3 is not the only ones you can have, but these are very effective, and if you put them in place, they can deliver. Okay? So I'm going to talk about a little bit on the more recent Japan initiatives and some of the things we did, because Japan is one of those countries that is more challenging. We did make a lot of progress in Japan, but we did not get to 50%. So we've been working on different elements. One of them is to reinforce the value of a career, the career track. And then so one of our initiatives is, there are many times where like super mom is displayed. We wanted to move away from that, because super mom, by definition, like any superhero, just there are not so many around, right? We wanted a natural, normal working woman. So what we did is we started to have these lectures of our own team, Women that were in the 40s or something like that, they had a career, they had been promoted, they were married, they had children, and they started to share with the younger women how they did it in the Japanese context, Japanese culture, Japanese families, Japanese commute, Japanese everything. And they were very effective, and they have continued to be very effective as role models for sustainable diversity. You don't have to be superwoman to do this. The other thing, we changed completely our policy on maternity leave, and we did that by, sorry, I'm going to get my water. Thank you. We did that by offering 3-year leave, optional leave, so anybody can come back up to 3 years. And then we offer total schedule flexibility when they return, and career advancement when they return, obviously. And with this, we retain 100%. Last year, we had 16 women coming back from maternity leave. 100% came back. So, and this 3-year, almost nobody took it. But the point was, this gave a lot of flexibility to these new mothers to think, okay, I have 3 years to make a decision. They made the decisions at 1.5 years, 2 years, but at least they knew they had we value them greatly, and that they had a lot of room to consider. I had a transition here, but it's not showing. Anyway, we wanted to change behavior, and this is why you have this thing on top of this. I'll explain. We changed from equal man to equal boss. And basically, this was a very kind of a social experiment in the company. We wanted to make sure that, the issue of participation in women becomes so big. It's just like a huge, like world peace and all these things. We wanted to make it very personal. So these stickers that show EcoBoss, and this little program that we launched, which is being covered now, this actually shows you could give to a colleague, you could give to your boss, you could give to anybody you wanted. And basically, the way the behavior was reinforced was, let's say I'm your boss, and you come to me and you say, hey, Gerald, tomorrow we have a meeting at 3 p.m., but I need to take my daughter to ballet class, I don't know, whatever. Then I say, okay, sure, no problem. We'll change the meeting. Then you could give that sticker. People started collecting these stickers and put them in their desk to show that they were great colleagues that appreciated that. Or maybe we are colleagues, and I agree not to have the meeting at 5 p.m. because it's inconvenient for you, and I'd rather do it at 10 in the morning. This was very powerful and simple change behavior, just to reinforce the kind of attitudes you want in people, which is about not the boss only, it's colleagues, who schedules the meeting at the wrong time. I think everybody has experience with that. And if you work in a multinational organization, US organizations, they love to set up 10 o'clock conference calls, PM conference call, right? So this was a way for someone to express. And so people started to making videos saying, oh, so-and-so is an equal colleague or equal boss. It was very powerful, and it very cheap, and it worked very well. We also made some changes to the work environment. Among them, we started this initiative. It's called Flexibility for No Reason. So basically, as long as you discuss with your boss, you can go work from anywhere, anytime. From the Starbucks, from Hawaii, from wherever, right? So you could set your own hours, you could come early, you can come late, and this basically put the pressure on the boss to set the expectations of what do I want you to get done versus how many hours do I want you to sit here. Completely different. What is the job that needs to be done versus are you sitting here lunch, night, and staying until 11 p.m.? The other thing is we moved last year to Toronto Mont Hills, and then so we launched a new work style, and then I can show you some of the pictures. It's a really cool office. We made this big cafe, 70-seat cafe, many sitting areas, 1, 2, 3, 4. We had like 9 different sitting areas. So the boss no longer knew when everybody was, because you could sit anywhere. 95% was free address, open seating. So the boss really had to set very clear expectations for his or her team, and then they disappear. And then sometimes they didn't see them a lot at all, because we had flexible work environment. So you actually did not need to come to the office. You could work from home, you could work from the other side of the building. It was a whole floor, so it was not easy to keep track of people. This actually benefited women a lot, because you know the boss in other Japanese companies, maybe you are lucky and you don't work in any of them, but boss is always checking, why did he went to toilet? Oh, long lunch, all these things, right? No, everybody disappeared. Nobody knew where anybody was. And they just needed to get the stuff done. So they set up the meetings, progress report, and so this has been, it actually surprised me. I was working very closely on this office design, but it surprised me how the environment became an enabler of the work policies and the freedom that people started. And actually, over time, people just loved it, right? They loved working there. So, last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, because many of you are working, of course, for companies, but I actually think that there is a great opportunity for men and women to be entrepreneurs in Japan. As you probably know, the rate of entrepreneurship in Japan is very low compared with many countries, right? 1/4 of the US, for no reason whatsoever, because there's money here, there's technical expertise, there's a huge market in Japan alone, it's a wealthy population, but even within that, we're very low participation. And then when you look at women entrepreneurs, Japan ranks number 15 in the kind of the conditions for being a successful entrepreneur. And there are many challenges, but I think that there are also many opportunities, because many women in Japan are, as we said, extremely well educated. The market is very large, very wealthy, can afford many things, but they don't launch companies because they don't really have access to, I think, not only maybe capital or the viable alternatives for starting the company, but also many of them don't have the right managerial and functional skills to build the companies, which you see in many countries, like in the US, of course in Silicon Valley, but in Germany and whatever. These countries have a very nice and rich environment that allows someone to do startups. But I do believe that women entrepreneurs in Japan could have a very nice long-term opportunity. I want to close by this. If you're interested in anything, I am also in the board of Catalyst. Catalyst is a nonprofit. Okay. Thank you. I don't think I need this. It's a nonprofit organization based in the US, and for more than 50 years, Catalyst has been looking for opportunities for women in all spheres of life, government, profit, nonprofit. And there is this online open courses. All of them, I can send you the information if anybody's interested. Many of them becoming a successful leader beyond work-life balance, communication, inclusive leadership. They're all free. And then if you're interested in the topic, you can access them very easily. And Catalyst is now present in Japan, and we are doing many things to support the Japan initiatives. But I thought I will share this with you in case you are interested in, looking at some of this. So that's it. So
Thank you very much for inviting me, and Gerald, thank you for a fantastic presentation. I've made a massive list of questions, but of course I will be opening up to the room for all of you to ask your questions. So maybe I'll spend about half an hour with a few questions that I've got in mind, and then I'll open up to the floor and give you plenty of opportunity to speak to Gerald as well. One of the first things I want to ask you actually is, for Baxter, there was a great opportunity in terms of the fact that Baxter was growing, and so you needed to hire more talent. So some of the companies I'm working with, they're not growing, or they're having to get a little bit more lean, or, if I think of the financial industry after the financial crisis, they were cutting down on staff. So what would be your advice to companies where they don't have this great growth opportunity at the time?
Yeah, I would say that, and I didn't touch as much on the retention side. I think that regardless of whether if you're not growing, I think many people have a significant retention issue in the market. I think that's why we focus on the maternity leave. I mean, all companies lose an enormous, I would say it's 25%, the return rate of highly rated professionals, that the only thing they're doing is having a child. And a child is 2-3 years commitment for a career of 30 years. Doesn't make any difference, right? And so I think that retaining talent, that even the one that you have, I think is a critical element, even in people that are flat or reducing, leaning out.
Okay, so if we think about retaining talent, then we need an environment, maybe things systemically in the environment that supports them. Yeah. But also I think a big part is the mindset of other people that you're working with, right? Yeah. And your manager. Right. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, is changing the mindset of managers of people, whether it's women, whether it's other diverse candidates as well. So how do you change their mindset? If they're not seeing the possibility of we're growing, they need to retain someone who's different from them. It's maybe difficult for them to figure out how to work with them. You mentioned things around, we're not lowering standards, etc., but they probably got in the back of their mind, well, are we lowering standards? So how do you change the mindset of those managers?
I think that in general, my experience is that nowadays, it used to be that you had to convince everyone that this was a good thing to do, that women should be retained and promoted. I think that many managers nowadays, they agree with the premise. I'm not finding as many people, maybe they're not telling me the truth, but I expect that they are telling me the truth, that they believe that this should be done. I think what many people are challenged is how to do it. Please explain to me, how do I get it done? I want to do it. I'm with the program. I'm supportive, but how do I get it done? So I think, for example, in Catalyst, one of the things we are launching is something called vital signs. And these are just ways to evaluate what basic things you are doing or not doing, right? It's just a very simple thing. And if you're not doing some of those, for example, if you are not having a more flexible work schedule for your workforce, men or women, you cannot continue to attract talent that wants more flexibility. And there is no technological reason why you wouldn't allow this flexibility. Any of you can be as effective sitting here with a PC than, driving or taking a train, 30 minutes somewhere to go sit in a same desk, right? It's not, that time is gone, right? So I think that adding this flexibility and teaching people how to do it is one of the critical elements.
Mm-hmm. This is something I'm seeing. In companies, I see people kind of beating everybody over the head with the why. The M curve, or, everybody seems to understand we need to attract and retain a more diverse range of talent. We need to tap into a wider pool of talent and so on. And at the same time, people in principle agree with that, but in practice they don't necessarily do any actions that support it. I'm still thinking those, and I'm not completely convinced that once we start teaching people a little bit of the behaviors they need to do, the how, that they're still necessarily bought in. For example, I think that sometimes men might be threatened. They may be wondering, well, if we're going to be working on increasing number of women in senior positions, does that mean there's less of a possibility for me? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of individuals. I'm an optimist, so I hope that everybody gets to see the benefit of the balance. But sure, there are a group of people that probably will never agree. You know, hey, we can think of quite a few Japanese politicians that will be in that group. But I think that the force of the rest of the change, it will be so dramatic. I mean, I didn't want to spend time discussing why women are so important for the future of Japan with an aging population and declining population. You know, there are so many other reasons, right, that you can argue, particularly in Japan. But I do think that I will ask you, I think there has been, the last 5 years have been dramatic change in Japan in maybe not the numbers reflecting everything already, but really the interest and the desire of people. I don't know if that's your experience.
I'm seeing, yes, more interest, more desire, and at the same time, I'm still seeing a very stubborn, what we sometimes call the marzipan layer, right? The kind of layer of middle management, who I think still feel threatened that they're looking around and thinking, well, now we're decreasing my opportunity. What I also see is when it comes to calibration and promotions, or even hiring, unless they're really forced to consider a 50-50 slate of candidates, managers will still tend to go towards people they have a relationship with, somebody that's their favorite. They're arguing, I know we need to promote more women, however, this man is the right person to promote this time. Yeah. So I think there is still quite a lot of pushback. And for me, a big part of that is the mindset, that before we can do the how of the behavior, we need to figure out how we change their mindset.
Yeah. I mean, nobody is ever happy to be passed by someone else on a promotion. I mean, if 3 people are being considered, doesn't matter what gender they are, or probably what nationality they are, nobody's happy that someone else got selected. But as an organization, as leaders of the organization, it is the job, not of the human resources department, it is the job of the leadership to make sure that all 3 candidates are looked with the same lens, with performance, potential, behavior, our values, our culture, etc., and then the best one is chosen, right? If 2 will be disappointed, guaranteed. Even maybe 2 men, even if all of them were men in the slate, right? So.
You mentioned senior leadership being part of that process. So something I see in organizations is that they're leaving that to HR. And so they may come up with some, best practices, such as we should consider men and women for a particular position. We ask our recruiters to show us an evenly balanced slate of candidates. When it comes to promotions, then again, they're saying everybody has to consider both genders for promotions and explain their decision. However, it seems like sometimes when it comes to monitoring that's allocated to HR. And HR sometimes are more kind of transactional. They're not being so strategic, and so they're not really observing that. Sometimes they're simply too busy to be able to do that. So can you tell me a little bit more? I think, senior leadership, accountability and ownership and drive is really important. How do you get that?
Yeah, I think that HR has a very important role to play as being the enabler. But HR cannot be the owner of this initiative. This is an initiative, after all, how do we improve our talent? And it's not HR talent, it's finance talent, marketing talent, manufacturing talents, any kind of talent, right? So I think that the leadership, not only the senior leader, but all the leaders, need to embrace this. But also that's why I showed that I didn't show the full report, but that's why on a weekly basis, every leader in Asia Pacific received the same report that looked at, the talent acquired. It was not delegated to HR, and it was enabled by HR, but everybody share in the interest of getting this done. Right?
So they could see each other's scores as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Every team, every different team, and every country.
Yeah, and that can sometimes breed a little bit of competition, or it can get people thinking if their scores are not looking that great.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you cannot blame HR because you are getting the report yourself. So what are you doing? Right?
You talked about communication as one of the pillars, and that you were communicating your numbers, how you were doing in terms of retention, in terms of promotion, and so on. You showed, your numbers were great. If the numbers had been going in the wrong direction, would you still have communicated that to all of your people via town halls, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, there were other numbers of other measures that were not going well, and I communicated them. No, I think you need to be transparent, and then the reason why we wanted to have all this reporting and all this tracking is we really wanted to understand the variables that drove the result. And I think we had a period of in 2011 where we had some reversals, and we started to evaluate. And after that, I didn't share that piece. We actually implemented in 2011. It was actually in the timeline, but I didn't spend so much time on the timeline. In 2011, we started to take out the pipeline only of women. So we separated our high potential and leadership pipeline, and we extracted all the women and evaluated how many women we had ready for each position. And then we found the gaps. Then we said, oh, this is a place where we don't have as much. And that's no wonder why we don't have, the numbers are not going up. So I think it just helps you. You need some, I don't think this is a touchy-feely subject. I think you need to have some numbers and some actual figures to be able to have a good conversation.
What would you say to companies that still consider this to be very sensitive information? So quite a few companies I work with, they maybe have some great initiatives in place. They're not proud of the results yet, or they're not getting the results they want just yet, or they see themselves slipping backwards. And then they say, oh, but none of our people will know this, we won't tell them this. And my thinking is, well, even if they have great initiatives, people look around them. They'll notice things are changing or not changing. And yet there's a tendency to say, oh, this is sensitive information. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think that you have to be transparent, because unless it's a secret initiative, which kind of defeats the purpose, right? Yeah, as long as everybody knows that there's an initiative, then by not providing some data and some transparency, then people assume the worst, or you are telling us this is really important, but you're not sharing anything with us. So I think it's actually worse. I think, now whether you want to issue a press release, that's a different thing. But within the organization, to have some credibility, you definitely will need to have some, and actually you can have a focus group to ask. We had an issue in Australia at some point in which this is the weirdest issue. So we asked the women, what percent do you think that the next promotion will be a man or a woman? So in total has to be 100%, because they basically, except extraterrestrials, nobody else can take the job, right? But when we asked the men, the number did not up to 100%. So we were completely stunned. How can it be that who takes the other job? So if the men or the women are not promoted, who gets the job, right? And so we did some focus groups, and actually it identified a completely different issue, which was they felt that there would not be so many promotions in the future for men or women. But only because we were transparent and we couldn't understand the data and we share. And sometimes it's not good, but at least you have to kick it around with people and be open, I think.
And then extending that into outside of the organization, so not simply like a press release. What about external benchmarking? What do you think about benchmarking with other companies, whether within the same industry or different industries within the country? How useful is that?
I don't know. I think that the most useful measure, in my opinion, is how much progress are you making yourself. Because at the end, you have a set of circumstances, you have a talent pool, you have a specific business. And it's different when I tell you, to go from 50 to 75 will be really hard, right? To go from 5 to 10 is like this, right? So I think that looking at what you are doing and how you improve against your own benchmarks. Now, I heard a company some time ago that the head of HR told me, we are at 5% and we expect to make 1% improvement every year for the next 10 years. So I said, oh, okay. I mean, it didn't seem so impressive to me, but at least that was the framework on how they wanted to evaluate themselves.
Right. That's a little bit like when we think of ourselves, that as an individual, we should compare ourselves with where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, how we've improved, changed, moved on, as opposed to comparing with other people. So I kind of see it as being something similar to that. Because what I see a lot are, some ranking systems. For example, Nikkei Woman magazine does a ranking system, top 100 companies in Japan for working women. And for example, they may count how many women managers you have. And we know that Abe is focusing in on that as well. But we're not comparing apples with apples. Some companies, people are considered a manager even if they have nobody reporting to them. Some companies with one reportee. Some companies you need to have 5 before you're considered a manager. And so then they'll see themselves ranking well, or they'll even change the definition of manager to make sure that they're ranking well. So sometimes I wonder with these external benchmarks, could be useful, but could also just be a numbers game.
Right. That's why I think the true measure is really at the leadership level. Because all things in between cannot happen. You cannot get to the leadership level unless in between the manager, senior manager, director, senior director, whatever levels they have, is moving along. Right? So I think, and at the end, everybody knows, there are global reports that gives, quick benchmark, where you stand. Yeah, so.
And sometimes some companies get a little bit complacent, or middle management say, well, we're doing so well, so no need to change, right? And
that's right. Well, actually that happened to us.
What you want.
That also happened to us. This is, I thought when we reach 50%, this would be like a bicycle. It's going. No. Every year, we had to redesign, change, tweak, relaunch, explore one aspect, remove one barrier. That's why I wanted to share more recent changes in the Japan conditions and some of the things we changed, which were very specific toward Japan and address issues that are not common to maybe other countries, but at least, we're very focused on improving our performance in Japan.
So it takes conscious leadership all the time, I think is what you're saying, that we can easily get complacent, or we think it's in our DNA and perhaps it isn't. And something we have to consciously think about systemically and in terms of managers and individuals. Yeah,
I was very surprised. I really thought once we get to critical mass, 50%, very good critical mass, it will be smooth sailing. It wasn't like that. It was not as hard, of course, as the beginning, but you really still needed to do things.
And what's interesting about that is you mentioned that the percentage of women gradually increased, right? The percentage of women managers gradually increased. And yet still, you could have reached a point of plateauing or dropping a little bit where that complacency is there. And so what that's telling you is that actually women were just as biased about their own group as perhaps men could be.
Yeah, also because as you move up, there is again the same competition for talent, right? So women our top women were being targeted by everybody that wanted to get there quickly. Also, their conditions change. So when your children are 10 years old, having home care or long maternity leave is not so valuable, right? So you need to do other things. Right?
Let me ask you something. Having hired a lot of people externally, so something I hear these days is that actually women who are capable of being managers in Japan can command a higher salary or a better package than men, because so many companies right now are looking for women managers. Do you have any thoughts or experience on that?
Well, first I have to say we never had any salary gap. Right? Some of our highest paid people in the company were women. It was just a reward for performance. I don't know. I don't have any experience. I assume that in some sectors it might be true, but no, I haven't seen that.
Okay, yeah. It's an interesting phenomenon where I think some women are beginning to leverage their gender. And
why not?
Why not? Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the flexible working environment. So you said that when you moved to Toronto Hills and you had this beautiful new environment, that was definitely an enabler for working more flexibly. Which came first? Did you start what did you call it, flexibility without reason? Did you start that before the move?
Yeah, before.
Okay. And so then can you talk a little bit about how did that change, or how was that implemented or done differently after you moved? I'm sort of wondering whether the actual physical environment made a difference in terms of getting people bought in or comfortable to the idea of working flexibly.
Yeah, we had launched it, I don't remember exactly, maybe 6 months or so before. We had this flexibility for no reason, but it was not implemented and it was not as effective, because if everybody sits in front of you, then you are the only one that asks for time off. Then your 3 colleagues don't ask for the time off, so the boss can say, "Oh yeah," So, but by implementing the physical location, which actually created different expectations, what happened to the managers was when we were moving, almost no one had worked in an open environment, free address place, right? But people started to complain, we don't want to work in that environment. I made the decision because actually we reduced our office space by 25%. We combined 2 offices and we reduced it by 25%. And it was frankly the only way we could afford Toronto Hills, right? So I said, hey guys, the floor plate is this size. That's where everybody has to sit. So we have to be free address. So people started to say, we don't like it, but we actually didn't have we only had lockers. No, at night, if you go to the office, there is not one single piece of paper on any table. Everything that is left overnight is thrown away. So truly, you had a locker, and that's where you put all these things, and that's it. We don't even have fixed phones. Everybody has an iPhone, right? So actually, it was cheaper than having fixed phones, but that's a different story. But this really enabled people to sit anywhere. So we said flexibility for no reason, but also force the boss to really set the expectations of what he or she wanted on Friday for the week. And then people just could go and do whatever they wanted. But the other thing was it subverted a little bit the authority of the boss, because the boss said, well, I don't know where they are. So I asked a few of them, well, you're the boss, right? They need you because you have all the knowledge and you guide them. And they must consult you, right? They said, yeah, of course, I'm the boss. I said, well, in that case, they'll find you if they need you. And as we all know, nobody needs their boss more than 20% of the time, right? So everybody just went. And today, lots of people just sit in the cafe all day long. It's a catered cafe, and then they move, and we actually reduce the number of meeting rooms. People meet casually, and it really forced kind of a different environment.
Yeah,
so it helped a lot.
It's an example of disruption, right?
Yeah.
That then people are forced to do something different.
Yeah.
Maybe some companies that are not ready to move premises at least force everybody to take the unconsumed holidays they've yet to take, close the building and change the design a bit.
Yeah, that's right.
But you mentioned, though, that first people didn't like it. And sometimes people state that before flexibility comes into place, or the policy exists, but still they say, but it won't work here, it won't work with my team, it won't work in this industry, it won't work in this country. In your case then, in Baxter's case, it was kind of forced to some degree. How long did it last where people are kind of kicking and screaming saying, we don't like this? I mean, I know it was kind of painful growing up they had to go through anyway, but how long did that last?
Very quickly, like 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. And everybody just was settled down, different place. It, of course, helps that it was a beautiful place, right? It's very nice, it's a very good building, and it was, again, you have to give people choices. That's why we had 9 different seating areas, couches, some individual seats, this type of table, the other type of table. And so people really could choose. And there were some places where I will never sit in my life, and people loved them. And there were places where I sit and nobody liked it. So it's just, you have to understand that there's a lot of individual. You have to make sure that there is space for work together, also for concentration, for making a private phone call. So you just have to offer all those things. And once they experience it, I think they get on board. Yeah.
And obviously it's completely transferable into working with virtual teams,
Yes,
global
exactly.
teams. It's kind of doing the same thing,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
I had one more question, and yes. So Baxter's a multinational. What about domestic companies? Do you think there's anything different? Because I think, for a multinational, maybe some influence or expectations from global. How about if you look at, say, a domestic company in Japan or even a Japanese multinational? Do you think anything would be different?
We had we were very lucky because people got interested in the office. So we had a number of journalists, and we had actually many photo shoots of models on the weekend, because they use the background for this and that. But we also had Nikkei come and interview. And so they came to interview and they asked the same question. So I said, but our employees are all Japanese. Their mothers are Japanese, grandparents are Japanese, they are from Japan. So I don't really think there is any difference. I mean, what I said, culturally speaking, in the company we had 5 foreigners out of 1,000 people. That's a very low percent, right? And then they're all Japanese. So we took them on a tour, and I said, pay attention, they're all Japanese. So they went on the tour, they realized all Japanese, and I said, if our Japanese group is not any different than any other Japanese group. And so I believe that is very transferable. And I think it just takes a mind shift. And I don't think that it declines performance or execution or anything like that. Now, there are a couple of groups that did not have flexibility. One is our customer service group, because they deal with patients directly, and so they cannot have the sort of flexibility because they have to be available all the time. So that was a very specific group. And then kind of the general IT and administration group that serves everyone, so they don't have that flexibility. But everybody else, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, that falls in line with my philosophy too, but I hear it a lot, but we are different, or in this industry, or in Japan, there's no way we're able to be flexible, or we don't have the child care services available, therefore, always lots of reasons why it might be different, right?
Right.